excited to get together today with our friends from the AWS team to discuss how to protect your AWS hosted business against sophisticated bots and online fraud. We'll start today's discussion with some brief introductions here before the team from AWS will discuss mitigation using some of their tools and the opportunity to protect at the edge. And then my team at DataDome will share how our solutions pair well together for a better together defense of AWS customers. Abhinav, would you want to kick off introductions on your side?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. We appreciate the DataDome team hosting us today. So my name is Abhinav Banerjee. I am an account solutions architect. That means I'm essentially a generalist across all of our services, but all of us SAs pick one area of expertise, and Jonathan and I picked at services. So we really focus on Shield, WAF, and a lot of the services that we'll be talking about later today. I'll kick it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Abhinav. My name is Jonathan Woods, and I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and excited to be here. Like Abhinav said, part of the subject matter experts in some of the services we're going to be talking today, and really excited to get started. Thanks for being here.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm Mike Thompson. I'm an enterprise account executive for the DataDome team based out of Minneapolis. I've been with the team for almost a year now, so excited to see the story to come to light. Jason, you want to give yourself an intro too?
Sure, everybody. Thanks for joining. Glad to be here with the AWS team. Jason Vick, I'm a solution engineer. Been working to onboard customers at DataDome for just over 2 years now. Pleased to be here.
Thanks, Jason. All right. Well, with that said, I think we have everybody introduced. So let me just kick us off and get started. And the first thing that we want to talk through is really why are we doing this, right? What is the threat landscape? Why do we need security at the edge? So we've prepared a quick visual here for you to have just a quick reference point. And really what the mental model needs to be is divided into volumetric attacks or denial of service attacks, right? Or application-based attacks. And in general, the threat landscape for web applications that are hosted today is getting more and more sophisticated. So the categories that I have listed here continue to get populated with more and more vulnerabilities that continue to get exploited, right? So it's a dangerous sort of landscape, right? And it's getting more and more dense. But at a high level, if you're not familiar, volumetric DDoS attacks, these are things like SYN floods or UDP reflection or amplification attacks. They typically require a large amount of resources to pull off. And it's typically where you're sending a huge amount of traffic at the application network, just completely rendering it, right, useless, overwhelming the network infrastructure. And if the main purpose of DDoS attacks is to disrupt the availability of the application attacks then at the application layer, they're more to compromise the server and steal data, do data exfiltration, things like that, right? So you may have heard about some of these common attack vectors in modern media and all kinds of places like SQL injection, cross-site scripting attacks, command injection, so on and so forth. More and more common, though, is the prevalence of bots, right? Bots are all over the internet. They're often used very effectively to perform all kinds of things like site scraping, where we're talking about setting up phishing sites by scraping site data and luring users, legitimate users, into sort of a bad website. Inventory grabbing. This one's really popular in the media as well. The idea of, hey, let's use bots to buy up all the popular items like concert tickets, sneakers, graphics cards, all kinds of stuff, and then sell them later at a higher price at auctions and so on and so forth. And then there's the typical credential abuse that everyone is wary of, which is the idea of, what if I have a leaked user ID or a password combination somewhere, and trying to find a valid ID password combination and target sites by doing brute forcing or social engineering and performing fraud with those compromised accounts, all kinds of things, right? So there's a ton out there to worry about and to protect against. So how do you start, right? So what's the best way to protect these applications? And it starts with building a secure perimeter. Of course, security, as AWS, we like to say, isn't need to be performed in layers. The outside layer, the edge layer, is really where you want to start building a secure perimeter. So you need to push the attack surface out to the edge as much as possible, away from your application resources and out to the boundary, right? And so we refer to that boundary as the perimeter, the boundary where your applications are connecting to the internet. And this visual here is just kind of showing you in a neat way where the AWS Edge network spans today, right? So we have a network of 600 or more points of presence. We call those edge locations, and we also have 13 regional edge caches. These are now covering 100 plus cities in over 50 countries or in 50 countries, and it's continuously growing. So I'm sure that number will continue to be outdated. I have to update the slide quite often. So the idea is that the security of the perimeter includes secure content delivery, application layer protection, and again, protection against distributed denial of service attacks and mitigation. And so you want to start with the most dense and furthest out perimeter, and that's where you can use the global edge network that AWS provides to do something like this, right? So when you're using this edge network, you can improve your application performance for your end users. You can also increase availability and security. And DDoS attacks, when you're pushing out closest to your users like this, are also geographically isolated closer to the source. So if there's bad actors that are trying to get closer to your application origin, your use of the edge network allows you to push that out closest to them, and that prevents the traffic from impacting other locations and other users. So from a customer protection, we call this DDoS protection Shield Standard, or AWS Shield Standard, and it's integrated natively into the global edge network and is provided at no additional cost. So Shield Standard is going to provide you protection for common attacks and most frequently occurring infrastructure, layer 3 and layer 4 attacks, the things that we talked about earlier, like SYN and UDP floods, reflection attacks, and others, and supports the high availability of your applications. And that's, again, it's available on across a lot of our AWS services in every AWS region and all the edge locations that I just mentioned earlier. And when you're using that edge network, we're talking about use of CloudFront typically, right? So Amazon CloudFront is our content distribution service. It lives in that edge network. And when you're using this edge network, like I mentioned earlier, you can improve application performance for your end users and also increase availability and security. So this is typically how a lot of our customers will end up architecting their static or dynamic content serving applications, right? It's really built for high performance, built for security, built for developer convenience. And AWS hosts CloudFront, as well as our DNS service, if you've heard of it before. It's called RAP53, on a distributed network of these proxy servers and these data centers throughout the world. And again, those are those edge locations. So if you have a public internet-facing HTTP endpoint today, we recommend that you're using CloudFront to distribute that content. And that way, CloudFront is acting as that front door to your application and to your infrastructure. And the primary attack surface, it's moved away from all the critical content, data, the code, the infrastructure that lives at the heart of your application. It's important to note that CloudFront comes with a lot of different features, and the one that I like to call out the most is the ability for you to be able to configure geographical restrictions natively within CloudFront to block attacks, originating from specific countries. So a lot of customers think that using a CDN means that you have to use and serve content across all the regions at once or all the countries. That's not the case. You can specifically restrict content to only be served to specific areas. So that's something that I always like to call out. So at a high level, we have a suite of products to help protect your network and applications. And I've already talked a little bit about the first one, and Jonathan will go deeper into these later on. But very briefly, Shield is that managed distributed denial of service protection service. It's safeguarding applications running on AWS. WAF, or Web Application Firewall, is it's a firewall that helps protect your web applications or your APIs against common web exploits like the ones we talked about before, as well as bots, account fraud prevention, things like that, right? So it's going to help you at the application layer, at layer 7 of the OSI model, from those kinds of attacks and those kinds of bad actors. Then Firewall Manager, if you see here, is the security management service that essentially allows you to centrally configure and manage the firewall rules for things like WAF and Shield centrally, and allow you to apply it across all your accounts. So if you have more than 10 accounts today and you're using AWS organizations to manage that set of accounts, you can integrate with Firewall Manager natively to allow for all of this to be orchestrated in a way that provides you the most convenience. And so typically we do see customers using services like CloudFront, Shield, WAF, our DNS service like RAP53, all of them together to create a flexible layered security perimeter against multiple types of attacks, including the network and application layer attacks that I've already talked about. And the benefit that you get is that all of these services co-reside at the AWS edge, and they provide you a scalable way, a reliable way to architect for security without having to put a lot of effort into setting that all up yourself. With that said, I'm going to pass on over to Jonathan to talk a little bit more about how WAF works.
Appreciate it, Abhinav. So actually looking at how WAF can be set up within your own infrastructure, or how it will work in terms of the features available within the service, it can attach to things like your CloudFront distributions, your application load balancers, your API gateways, or app sync. How it works from a high-level perspective is you can create a policy and you define the rules that you're looking for in a policy. We have some out-of-the-box rules that you can use, or you can create your own. Determine the action that you're looking for, whether it's block or filter and request, like some of the attacks that Abhinav mentioned, whether it's SQL injection, cross-site scripting, some rate-based limiting you can have. And then how that looks from terms of monitoring is you look at the logs to determine connecting to other downstream services for analysis to determine the accuracy, the benefits, and the traffic that you can make, or the traffic that's hitting your application, to make adjustments as needed. You can kind of see on the left side that Firewall Manager, as Abhinav mentioned, is one of those services that manages multiple WAFs. So if you have multiple applications across your AWS environment, multiple ways that you could use WAF on your applications, you can manage that with the service like Firewall Manager. Moving to Shield a little bit, we talked a little bit at a high level where it integrates into the larger ecosystem and the benefits it brings. But when it comes to the actual approach that you would take and how it attaches within your infrastructure, you can see it's integrating with some of the services that we already mentioned, like WAF and Firewall Manager. So Shield Advanced, the managed DDoS protection, is going to be attached to some of your resources, like a global accelerator or another load balancer, as mentioned, or an elastic IP on some of your EC2s. And what that's going to bring you is it's going to, again, like the picture that was shown earlier, bring some protection for your edge locations. Your entry points into your environment is going to bring that DDoS protection. That's going to bring benefits of SIM flood attacks or any kind of malicious attempts on your servers that are then is going to be protected and stopped at the edge. This is going to help in terms of load on your application or on your database in the back end. End user experience is going to be significantly better with stopping those attacks closer to the edge instead of allowing them to go back and be absorbed by your back end. Taking it even a little bit further by looking at, okay, what are some of the common architectures that we see with customers utilizing some of these services? You have the kind of the setups that we've been mentioning, whether protecting your web applications from a one-to-many perspective, maybe even protecting some of your latency sensitive applications that you might have set up, whether that's streaming or gaming, whether you are protecting some of your serverless applications with maybe API gateway and the calls that are going into your backend to your system, or even protecting some of your on-premise applications. A lot of the customers fail to realize that some of these services that we're mentioning today can integrate with some of the back-end applications that you already have that are living on-premise. So taking advantage of protecting your resources in the cloud at AWS, but then also some of those resources that you haven't migrated yet or potentially looking to migrate, you can still add that protection for the on-premise applications. Looking at specifically an architecture setup for a web application, you can kind of see some of the services that we mentioned, whether it's the Route 53 with the shield protected icon beside it, whether it's a WAF attached to a CloudFront distribution at the edge locations, whether it's a WAF attached to a regional resource like a load balancer. Having some of these services that integrate with each other is going to bring the most value for your applications by, again, protecting it, stopping those attacks on the edge, but then also providing the best experience for your end users and your customers. And so looking at from a holistic standpoint, kind of wrapping it all together, some of the services that we mentioned with WAF and Shield, you can see the icons there attached to the CloudFront. You can see that we are holistically providing that protection for your applications at the edge. Using services like CloudFront gets you some of those protections out of the box, taking it another step further by adding specific granular applications to those CloudFront distributions, adding protections to them with Shield Advanced and WAF is going to give you the best options for your end users and their experience, but then also preventing attacks upon your applications. One of the ways that Amazon is looking forward to working and implementing some of these services that we just mentioned is working with some of our great partners. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to throw it over to Mike, and he's going to walk you through some of the connections that DataDome has with some of these services and the offerings and features that they present. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate the intro there, Jonathan. And important to note, AWS and DataDome already have a tremendous track record of success together. We help AWS customers like TripAdvisor, Etsy, SeatGeek, or the New York Times to optimize their bot mitigation and fraud prevention strategy by introducing a little bit of automation and AI for real-time defenses. DataDome's the leader in the bot detection and mitigation industry. We boast several proof points, including an NPS score of 74, which is a bit higher than the iPhone, even a G2 customer satisfaction score of 98 out of 100, by far the highest they've given in security industries. And we're recognized here most recently by Forrester's third-party analysts as having the strongest current offering on the market. And we're able to provide this extremely high fidelity bot detection for websites, mobile apps, and APIs through the power of our machine learning algorithms and AI. Each day, we're ingesting over 5 trillion signals from hundreds of the world's leading brands, and those signals, which we inspect for each and every one of the requests that are made on a web property, help us to create unique fingerprints for the automation that bad actors are using to scale their attacks. WAFs, rate limiting CAPTCHAs, and other online defenses provide that strong baseline to eliminate these threats. DataDome is able to identify, classify, and block those threats in real time without an admin needing to intervene and create new rules. Creates a paradigm shift in defending the edge by providing a force multiplier for teams that are seeing consistent and sophisticated attacks. We see competitive scraping as a driver for almost every customer that we bring on, but we can also stop things like credential stuffing, fake account creation, card testing, and any other automated action that's taking place on your web properties. Previously, these attacks can be deterred, but DataDome also brings some unique visibility into the actions that are taking place to allow us to classify these attacks for your team as well. So you can see consistent fingerprints used in a scraping campaign or credential stuffing effort, even if it is using disparate geos, IPs, and other variables. I wanted to share a couple examples of how that plays out for you, starting with our friends over at SNCF, who's a passenger train company operating out of Western Europe. SNCF was seeing a barrage of competitive scraping attacks that were targeting their ticketing services. These spikes in traffic overburden their infrastructure and create unreliable metrics for their team that we're hoping to optimize the site for customers. So what appears to be millions of people looking for trips to the south of France may require additional trips for the service, but in reality, it could have just been automation that sort of bamboozled the team making the decisions based on that skewed data. And those business critical decisions were bad for the brands, ultimately created more friction and hampered users' ability to actually use the site effectively. But after implementing DataDome, SNCF totally eliminated their bot problem. What's more, the bad actors turned away from their site after experiencing this new friction. While DataDome stopped 100% of the bots on the site, they saw a 75% reduction in traffic of bots in general because of this new barrier that was harder to surpass. So while we were able to block them, they actually were able to save 10% on infrastructure costs by not hosting all of that bad traffic. Another great example would be Best Western. Best Western came to DataDome to eliminate some loyalty point fraud, and apparently there's a massive black market out there for loyalty points. They have a monetary value, can be exchanged for hotel stays and things of that nature. So we knew account takeover and potential use of that account could be a place where we could stop some automation to prevent those sort of loyalty point fraud schemes. But we didn't know was there was actually some massive card testing going on in the background. Once bad actors gained access to those accounts, they were able to then use credit cards purchased on the dark web and begin testing to find the right combinations of expiration dates and CVE codes. But in the quarter trailing DataDome compared to the quarter after implementing our solution, they saw some massive changes, and we're generous enough to actually share some of that data back with us. When we were talking about the credential stuffing attacks, we were able to eliminate 97% of those attacks that could have led to account takeovers. The account takeovers after implementing DataDome actually dropped by 99% as well. Imagine for a second here, 4,300 fraud cases that involve a security team, infrastructure, the fraud team. There's customer success headaches, and even sometimes law enforcement getting involved to rectify the situation. That's each and every quarter. That rate just dropped to just 10 of these account takeovers on a monthly basis. And as the massive cherry on top here, we actually eliminated that automated card testing campaign, and that results in nearly $400,000 savings annually for Best Western, which more than paid for the DataDome solution, not to mention totally eliminating the loyalty point fraud that they came to DataDome to solve for in the first place. From here, I'm going to let Jason take over. He's going to share a little bit more about why the changing bot landscape makes it a little bit more challenging to stop them nowadays.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to Abhinav and Jonathan for walking through the perimeter security and edge security. So as we start to shift here, I'd like to share a little bit of information about what a bot attack looks like in 2024. And part of the story here is that we need to make sure that defense in depth is a key part of the strategy. The WAF's critical infrastructure, it provides very strong defense for, simply put, geo-blocking, any policy-driven decisions that you're making based on payload. This is a great tool to stop those attacks. But in the cat and mouse game that we see in today, we also notice that there are very small incremental changes made to requests to try to discover a way to bypass policy. So what DataDome focuses on is a lot of that problem. What that looks like, a lot more IPs on hands. Even before this onset of AI-driven attacks, we still were seeing high distribution, right? The distributed denial of service attacks. But now the distribution takes place no matter what the scraping activity is or account takeover. They're always going to be rotating IP addresses. We're also seeing the prevalence and easy access to residential VPNs. So if you do business in a specific region, now somebody can purchase a clean IP address from a residential ISP and access your content all in an automated fashion. We've also noticed the ability for bots to solve puzzles. This is accelerating, right? In the age of image recognition and the capacity for web testing to contain drivers that are capable of human-like input, we need advanced tools to be able to identify those. And then we also see, I kind of gave this one away just a second ago, but bots mimicking human behavior, right? So we can download extensions to headless browsers, and we can automate the coordinates that we want our cursors to move on a screen. We can automate keyboard input for usernames and passwords. So here's some more evidence. We're using the same technology to write our bots, right? There's services that you can go to. There's sites that you can use to get access to browsers that look just like the ones that our expected users access our sites with. We also see the distribution. We were talking about these IP addresses. We have clear evidence that bots are accessing our sites from millions of IPs across the globe. So, if the policies are very aggressive, we see fewer requests per IP address. And when we're looking at targeting IP addresses, we really struggle to do this with policy. What we see in this case, high incidence of false positive, and then also the risk of creating the consequences of this, a bad user experience, where we'll see disengagement or abandonment of session and a loss of conversion. We also know that bots are using these clean IP addresses. So when we look at the data that we're receiving from IP traffic, analyze this data, we can see organizational IP addresses are being abused, data center IP addresses are being abused, and residential IP addresses. Now, the highest standard, as you can see, are some of the most costly options from services where you can easily rent those or buy those addresses to access the content that you are trying to access. And now the latest news, this is a great development for user testing. we can create a perfect fingerprint and test our sites just like a user who's using Chrome would. We can see in this update from Google Chrome that now headless mode is a part of the same branch as the same Chrome that I'm running right now to access this webinar. So users can launch this process, has the same fingerprint as what we expect from a Chrome browser, and they just add a flag to carry out a headless session with that perfect fingerprint. Even harder to detect by a specific browser type that you would already normally be expecting traffic from. We also know bots possess the capacity to solve CAPTCHAs. So using puppeteers, we have this example here. It's a web driver that you can add into a headless Chrome instance. You can easily click a box. There's even some advancements in image recognition. Or if you'd prefer, for only a matter of dollars, you can pay for thousands of CAPTCHA solves through a service like 2captcha.com. So we have more to consider than ever before about how we will stop these people who are accessing sites using bots. So summarizing, you see the CAPTCHA farms we just discussed, residential proxies for those high quality IP addresses that we might expect to visit e-commerce sites, proxies where they'll distribute their traffic to bypass any rate limiting, and then anti-detect measures with browsers, right? So this clean fingerprint from something like headless Chrome. So let's introduce the cyber fraud platform and talk about how we address some of these concerns. So within our Bot Protect solution, we're going to be using real-time multi-layered detection to identify and stop these threats from reaching your site. With Account Protect, we talked about the story with Best Western. They made a 97% improvement with account takeover. Now, what that looks like beyond that, there's still 3%. Sometimes we need additional signals to be able to understand user intent, where they usually log in from, and when the account was created. This information is now available through tools like Account Protect. And then anybody who has talked to anybody in performance marketing knows that advertising budgets are amongst the biggest that you'll find at any e-commerce direct-to-consumer business. And these budgets can sometimes swell into the hundreds of thousands a month, up to millions of dollars a month to reach your target audiences. The consequence of all of this ad publishing is inadvertent or targeted ad fraud, where your ads are now vulnerable to being clicked and the subsequent cost per click reaching your bottom line with something that will never result in a impression or conversion that your business is after. With Account Protect or with Ad Protect, we're able to offer insights and also able to block IP that we see malicious behavior from, so that your businesses aren't having to pay for those clicks. Let's talk about detection a little bit more. So our real-time multi-layered ML detection engine, this means that in less than 2 milliseconds, our API will analyze each request that comes to a website, and we will match it up against the models that you see on the right side of the screen. We'll identify the verified bots and let them through. Or if you need to customize responses, we also have that option available. Maybe there's select partners that you prefer not to visit your site. But on the other hand, you also want to make sure that your SEO ranking remains very high. So Google, you probably get a pass. Then we're also going to look at custom rules, right? We want to know about the automation that you're running on your site, because we do have helpful automation that we use. If it's from that third party, we likely have a verified bot pattern for it. But if it's something that you've developed in-house, we have accommodations to allow that traffic through too. Now, signature-based detection. Let's focus on this one, especially talking about WAF. This is where a WAF is going to excel, right? If we know a bot pattern, we can stop it, no problem. But what about when it gets a little bit more sophisticated? Now, DataDome, since we're inspecting every request, since we're doing so in real time, and since we're making a decision in real time, we're able to also analyze and contrast the signatures, the behavior of the session, and also the intent of the session. Did they try to access a few pages and then start network scanning to see if they could find a vulnerable path on your site? We're also going to use time series data. So what this might look like, who makes the fewest requests on your site? That's pretty interesting data, because somebody may go and they may abandon the session, but somebody may at the same time launch 1,000 other sessions at the same time and access all of your product pages to get the data that they want. So we've seen that with automation today, it requires a sophisticated approach with zero trust. DataDome is going to analyze every single request that comes to a site to make sure that we identify the threat traffic as soon as possible. We also have many use cases where we'll take unique customer traffic patterns and develop custom models to protect your sites. All right, so let's take a quick look at an integration with AWS. There's not much time investment required to deploy. You can find us in the AWS Marketplace, and we're going to, on the viewer request of your CloudFront distribution, install a Lambda Edge function. Our teams are also available with any engineering requirements to assist with merging any existing functions that you may have. And we're also available to assist during the integration period to ensure quality service and that we're able to see all of the traffic very fast. So let's look at this better together, right? Here's your end users app accessing your site, reaching AWS VPCs, going through WAF. So WAF's very effective, right? We know these policies can stop high volumes of traffic. And then the more advanced attacks will be sent to the Lambda Edge function of DataDome. And here we'll take a little detour. This is not a redirect. We're taking signals from your request and doing an analysis in real time, at which point we'll send back the response and offer insights about whether this session was generated by a human or a bot. Then you can see the path will continue to CloudFront, content being served from cache, or onto your origin servers, and even APIs that may be publicly exposed for server-to-server communication. So I will now pass this back to Mike. We've got just a couple more slides to get through, and we thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. This is obviously ready and available through the AWS Marketplace. We are a part of the Partner Network and can easily be used in conjunction with the processes that you already have in place through AWS. So rest assured, we're a part of this ecosystem that can be easily accessed. And the question always becomes, how do I know if I'm vulnerable to these more advanced bot tactics? Am I vulnerable to some of the fraud that could be a result of downstream automation? We actually have an example that's ready for you guys here. We're going to drop a link in the chat very quickly. And what this will allow you to do is use our bot tester functionality. Now, the DataDome bot tester runs just some simple automation at a website. It's non-malicious. Trust me, it's not going to do any damage, but it would impersonate the same sort of things that a bot might use to slip past some of your defenses. And this will give you a good indication as to whether or not your current line of defense is adequate in defending against some of the newer tips and tricks that bots may be using. Now, some of you might score very positively on this, in which case it's going to be a good thing that you're protected, but ultimately could mean that there's a lot of time being invested into some of those conversations and creating barriers for bots, and others may find that there isn't as good of scoring through this bot tester. Don't panic if this is what you're seeing. We actually ran a audit of 9,500 of the biggest online properties here in the United States just last year in our annual bot report, and found that over 70% of them were inadequate in their defenses to these same exact tests. So you're not alone if that's the case, but absolutely the AWS and DataDome teams are here to help if that is the case.